G'day and welcome. This is part 2 of the two-part series where I'll be taking you on the journey of how I made my 18th century Jigglypuff cosplay. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, please check that out before you start this video. And just as a heads up, part of this will be a voiceover and parts of the audio will be pulled straight from the camera. Enjoy! It is very clear. A robe à la Francaise is simply not complete without a crazy amount of trim and detail. So in this video, we are going to be throwing a whole lot of fabric on top of the base dress. The first thing that I did was that I took a smallish remnant of silk that I had in my stash. This was actually left over from my Flora cosplay and was my favourite shade of pink from that particular project. I decided I wanted to make a fancy trim out of this, so I cut it into strips using pinking shears. And then came the part of making that fancy trim. It took some time to do. If you would like to learn how I did this Rosette style pleat, I have a tutorial about that which I'll link in the description.
Look at all that trim. Yep, so it was 33.25 meters of a continuous length of silk that obviously I sewed together. And it's been reduced down to about 7 meters or just over 7 meters of this trim. So yeah, it took about 10 hours of hand sewing, but we're there. We're on the other side now. So now I can continue.
However, before I added that, I added a ruffle around the neckline and down the front of the dress. The fabric that I'm using here is a brocade from my stash and it was actually my nan's. It was the perfect shade of pink with flecks of the right shade of blue. There wasn't a lot of it, so I cut it into strips using pinking shears, just like the pink silk, and sewed it straight onto the dress.
And here we are, the first lot of decoration is on the dress and it looks really, really lovely and I'm very happy with it. So I'm working on the placement of the circles. That took a while to figure out. There's actually 2 sizes there, slightly smaller on the top and slightly bigger on the bottom. And I think I just need to move the bottom one out slightly, but overall pretty happy with that, so that means I can move forward with that one.
Now layering up those circles. I wanted the base to be a solid colour so that the very fancy pink silk would pop. So I cut strips of this light blue satin that I had in my stash, also my grandmother's. I used a ribbon as the base length measurement and ruffled the satin down to the ribbon. Then I pinned the blue satin onto the dress and sewed it on using a machine before I pinned on the rosette trim. However, I noticed at this point that the petticoat was looking super plain in comparison to the overdress. So I decided to add some interest to it by adding a layer of chiffon with gold metallic thread through it, which I then added to the base of the stomacher to match and made the decision that I would also use that in the sleeves later on.
So this is where I'm up to. Sorry for the delay of notices, I kind of just went all in yesterday. But as you can see, the ruffles are on, they're currently pinned in place and I've added a layer of the chiffon to the bodice and also the petticoat. So yeah, now I just have to hand sew that all done, create the bows and do the sleeves and make a necklace and oh, the list goes on.
Now on to sewing down that rosette trim. I needed to do this by hand, and I decided it would be a nice little touch to add some sewable rhinestones in as I went. This process certainly took some time, but I liked the little extra sparkle. I did the same for the trim on the petticoat too, and with that, the majority of the trim was sewn on. Moving on now, it was time to create the bows. I started with creating the bases for the stomacher first from some other silk I had left over from Flora. If you want to know how I make my bows, you guessed it, I have a tutorial for that as well and I'll link it below. After that, I added an embossed organza overlay and sewed the rectangles into long strips. I then turned them right side out and sewed the edges together. Then using a needle and thread, I pleated down the bow and sewed it. And finally, I sewed a narrow rectangle just out of the pink silk, turned it right side out, and hand sewed some blue flower trim on it. I then wrapped it around the centre of the bow and sewed it all down. Once all the bows were ready to go for the stomacher, I sewed them on. I then repeated the bow making process for the 8 that went onto the skirt.
So update time. What I have here is I've got the bows and all the ruffles on the dress, which makes me very, very happy. So now it's just time to move on with the sleeves. So that's what I'm going to do next. I've got the undersleeves to do, and I've already cut out the oversleeves. So yeah, it's just going to be time to put that together.
I started off with the basics, doing a rolled hem around the oversleeves as they were cut from the same fail as the overdress. I also sewed up the side seams with a French seam. Next, I wanted to reintroduce that blue flower trim again, so I hand sewed this along the bottom edge of the 4 oversleeves. With that, the oversleeves were all prepped. Onto the undersleeves. I patterned these out using the American Duchess's Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking book, and I thought it best to give it a good iron as the chiffon had puckered a little bit, and then I did a rolled hem on them. On the bottom of each of these sleeves, I added a very narrow ruffle made out of the same chiffon to add a lovely little flounce that mirrored the bottom of the petticoat.
So I thought I'd quickly interject because I'm about to sew the sleeves on like the top 2 sleeves over here. I'm going to sew those down. The little like flounce ones, they're already sewn down. So that's what I'm going to do now, and then I'm going to add the like trim on top of it. And then, well, the dress itself is done. I still need to do the closures on the bodice, but I'll probably do that as the very last thing to do because I need to get the necklace done because at the moment it has no necklace. And then I also want to do something like for a hairpiece, and I want to make a mask because I want to get this all done by the weekend so that I can take some photos of it for a bit of a competition. So yes, the closures will be the very last thing to put into it because I figure, you know what, pinning a bodice in, that's still historically accurate. So, you know, it's fine if I don't get to it. I also pulled out all the rest of my fabric that I've got left for this project, and this is all I have. I also have all the fail still, but I would prefer not to use that for like the mask or finishing pieces because it's quite flimsy, but you know, it's been used a lot within the dress. So these are all like the trimmings and the other fabric. So I really don't have a lot of this left, which is great because that's the whole idea of a scrap epic kind of production, is to use what you have and use all of it and use it in a creative way. So yes, with this, I plan on finishing off the sleeves around essentially where the sleeves, the flounces meet the actual sleeves. I plan on using most of that pink trim for the neck choker, and then I'm also going to use the silk and the trim to make little bows. That's the plan, and also to make a big bow for the headpiece. And might even line that with some interfacing that I've got in my stash. And yeah, and also, you know, utilize whatever's left over for the mask. So that is the plan, and I'm gonna get cracking finishing off these sleeves now. Sorry for the lack of updates, but the sleeves are now complete, though I may add some bows here. But yes, I added the same ruffle that runs along here around there. And I also have just finished off this ruffle necklace, which I'm very excited about because it ties in the dark pink from the skirt and the underskirt so that it all looks very cohesive. So I think I'm good with this now. I just have to make the bow for the hairpiece, and and obviously these bows if I'm going to add them, and also a mask because masquerade reasons. Everyone loves competition, and so I thought I'd enter one with this Jigglypuff because why the heck not?
I will take this moment to mention that I finished what I set out to do and made the mask as shown here. It was totally over the top and I loved it for Jigglypuff. I have a whole video about the crazy adventure of me making that, and yep, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the link will be in the description if you want to see that too. G'day everyone, so it is winter officially here. It's the 1st of July, that's why I'm rugged up. I have this mask which I made, and I made a video about that. I'll link that up the top and down the bottom and all that good stuff. But it is time to rip this apart and finish off the Jigglypuff costume, so that's what I'm going to do now. Let's get seam ripping. And the costume is now done. Sorry that I couldn't get the last little bit of sewing, but unfortunately my battery really died. And it was only about an hour's worth of sewing anyway, so whatevs. But it is now time for my final thoughts. My final thoughts on this costume is that it was a lot of fun to put together, and it was an era that I never thought I would actually do. Up until probably a couple of months back, I never really liked the style of the 18th century. However, I guess doing this and watching other people's progresses of doing similar costumes has really given me a love for this era and just the sheer ridiculousness of it all. I also love the fact that this was a scrap epic costume. Everything that I had in my stash. I think I bought really only one thing that I ended up using. I can't even remember what it was, but you know, everything else I had. I got to use fabric that was actually my nan's, which made me very, very happy. And I think if I was to do one like this again, I would probably want to do it out of like a silk taffeta. But for the sake of this costume and the spirit of the scrap epicness, I am very happy to use the fail that I had as the main costume. And I've still got more of it. It's insane. As for the decorational like pieces of fabric that I used though, I literally had a handful of scraps. That's it. So I felt very, very pleased that I was able to use so much of my like stash on this costume. Yeah. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed that video. For you, it's been one video watching me make this. For me, it's actually been a couple of months of my life with about 90 hours of work that's gone into this. So it is an absolute joy to finally get this video out. I hope that you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you did for more videos like this one, and get ready with me and tutorials and all the good stuff. And hey, leave me a comment below, what Pokemon would you do this kind of outfit to? I'll see you all next time. Bye!